Good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome you to the DNC Council on Environment and Climate Crises' first ever meeting at the Democratic National Convention. I'm Michelle Dietrich, Chair and Founder of the new DNC Council, a Michigan DNC member, a proud union member, a former Peace Corps volunteer who served in Kenya, and a recent county commissioner who centered issues of justice and environment. Also a policy analyst and a poet. And I'm speaking to you from my family's 80-acre farm in Southeast Michigan. We have a packed, exciting program. We deeply value your presence and thoughts, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to some of the Council's leadership that made this event and so much else that the Council is doing possible. Vice Chair David Green is a certified public accountant and is a DNC member. He is the Vice Chair of the Washington State Democratic Party and lives in Spokane, the home of the first environmentally themed World's Fair in 1974, and is also a member of the Lands Council in Spokane. Also, I'd like to introduce you to Executive Board Member and the Council's Director of Black Engagement, the wonderful Allison Stevens, who is one of 2 elected DNC members from Nevada. She is committed to environmental and climate justice for frontline communities and seeks to uplift the risks that the climate crisis poses for public health. Certainly timely right now. Executive Board Member Pete Lee is the Council's Director of Asian American and Pacific Islander Engagement. Pete is also the Vice Chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon. Professionally, he serves as a senior analyst, working on renewable energy, smart grids, tech innovation, and the just energy transition. He's also a volunteer EMT and amateur radio operator who loves knocking doors and training volunteers. Officers who couldn't make it today include our California-based youth director, Dee Garcia, an active member of Sunrise. Jen Burney, who is also California-based science officer. Ellie Zaragoza, our Latina director. And I'd also like to acknowledge that Chris Round, a senior climate scientist who serves on advisory panel, is here today. A big thank you to all of them and to all the 100+ volunteers who contribute so much to the work of this council. Volunteers are the lifeblood of the Democratic Party and this council. And now Pete Lee is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Pete Lee, and I'm streaming to you live from downtown Portland, Oregon. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and for the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, someday.
Thank you so much, Pete. Good to have you here. We are gathered here today virtually rather than gathered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as planned. I'm proud that the party has forged again ahead with safe plans to this really remarkable convention. But the council also wants to acknowledge Wisconsin and beautiful Milwaukee and the people who lived on and loved and stewarded that land long before there was a United States. We are honored that Shannon Holsey, president of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, has graciously agreed to lead our land acknowledgement. Shannon Holsey has served 3 terms as president, following 8 years as a member of the Tribal Council. She grew up on the Stockbridge-Munsee Reservation in Bowler, Wisconsin, and has committed the tribe to serving as good stewards of its economic, environmental, and cultural heritage, as well as intellectual resources. Holsey also serves as president of the Great Lakes Intertribal Council and on the Wisconsin State Legislature's Special Committee on State-Tribal Relations. Her philosophy of leadership recognizes that Native Americans are growing economies, preparing students to succeed, and delivering high-quality health care, all while protecting the environment, upholding tribal sovereignty, and solving the unique challenges facing our tribal communities. Thank you, President Holsey, for this land acknowledgement.
Hi, my name is Shannon Holsey, president of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, located here in Wisconsin. It's an honor to be here with you today and to acknowledge that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Potawatomi, Menominee, and Ho-Chunk tribal nations, which is now referred to as Milwaukee, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, and where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain today. Indigenous nations have always shared a very special relationship and connection with the land, and which carries significant responsibilities of protections and stewardship. Indigenous peoples are one of the most vulnerable communities when it comes to the effects of climate change. This is due to a mix of cultural, economic, policy, and historical factors. Native American communities are very diverse, and the challenges and the adaptations are just as varied, much like the health and well-being of our climate. Mother Earth is being threatened by global warming and climate change. It is vital that we honor and protect her with active stewardship and by educating ourselves about the significant impact of this issue, not only in our community, but within the land that we gather, live, and learn. I hope that you enjoy the robust and important call to action today. Representation and advocacy matter. This year is one of the most important elections of our lifetime, and we must vote like our life depends on it, because Mother Earth does. Anishik.
I would like to welcome Chair Perez and thank him so much for his leadership and for making the time to be with us here today and for his assistance in establishing the Environmental Council. Thank you, Chair Perez.
Thank you, and happy anniversary, Michelle, and everybody on this great council. I'm coming to you from Milwaukee. We're day 2 today. I hope you were as inspired as I was yesterday. We had a wonderful day here. This is an unconventional convention, but these are certainly extraordinary and very unconventional times. And I was so proud of how we were able to step up to the plate and present who we are as a party. You look at the diversity of our party. It was on full display within the first 10 minutes of the presentation last night, and we saw remarkable speakers. I spoke today with Senator Sanders to thank him for his incredibly inspirational words and for the movement that he continues to lead and champion. We had a great conversation, and I think about where we were, where we've come. We've come a long way, and we are going to keep fighting for the values that matter so much to all of us. You're going to see a lot more tonight about leadership and what we need to do moving forward to build back a better America. And I'm really proud of what you'll see tonight. You're going to hear from, among others, Dr. Jill Biden, who is someone I got to know when I was working on Team Obama. And boy, she is every bit as authentic and accomplished as her husband. And I think you'll be really excited. She's actually delivering her remarks from a classroom where she taught for many years. So sort of a back to the future presentation. I want to thank everyone on the council for what you've been doing over not just this 1-year tenure of the council, but much more importantly, frankly, over the course of your careers, making sure that we pay attention and we give the attention to the issues of climate change that it deserves. One of the things I did when we were working on our platform was talk to my good friend Deb Holland and ask her to have, we have 3 slots that we had at the DNC to put on the Climate Council, or to put on the platform drafting committee. And I asked Deb to do that because I was listening to part of what you were saying as I just got on. And Deb is such a champion for the Native American community. She's such a champion on climate change issues. And so I was so excited when she agreed to do that. We've got a lot more work to do. We've got 75 days till the weekend, folks. And I hope every day we can all ask the same question that Senator Sanders, Senator Klobuchar, every one of our speakers said last night, which is we have to win. Our democracy as we know it is on the ballot. And that is how I live my life. Every day I ask myself, what am I going to do today to help Joe Biden and now Kamala Harris win? What am I going to do to help Democrats win up and down the ballot? and we are continuing to build what I think is a really muscular infrastructure. We're about 2,000 strong now in the coordinated campaigns in the battlegrounds, and we worked really hard to make sure we had diversity. We have in all these battleground states, our coordinated staff is actually more diverse than the state itself, and that's because we were very intentional in building a pipeline of talented, diverse, and homegrown leaders. And so I'm really proud of the teams that have been assembled, and they're working with so many other stakeholders in the ecosystem. I think we can do this, but I know it won't be easy. This president isn't going to give up without a fight. He already said that he's going to try to denigrate vote by mail, try to undermine public confidence in that. I won't accept the results. The thing we have to make sure we do is don't let him distract us. Don't let him put fear into us. Get out there, organize, organize, organize. And that's exactly what we're doing everywhere. I'm here in Wisconsin, as I mentioned, and we've been working since 2017, quite frankly, with the Wisconsin Democratic Party, because we knew that we fell short in 2016. And so we've been building infrastructure here for 3.5 years. What I love about the Climate Council is I know that you are a group of serial activists, and I know you are out there every day, perhaps today with your virtual clipboards in hand because of the situation with the coronavirus, but we understand the digital tools of engagement. We understand them at the DNC, you understand them in the various organizations that you're a part of. And when we win this November, we can finally put these values in action. I was just talking to the Alaska delegation and a couple of good friends up there, and you see what he's doing in Anwar. He is he's destroying the fabric of our democracy. He's destroying our physical environment. He has destroyed so many bureaucracies that are critical to protecting our environment, whether it's the Labor Department, whether it's the Environmental Protection Agency. We cannot afford to lose. Failure is not an option, folks, and that's why I'll sleep on November the 4th, 75 days till the weekend, and let's work together. And again, happy anniversary, and thank you for shining a light on the climate crisis. Thank you for making sure that we're living these values every single day as a Democratic Party. I look forward, Michelle, and the entire group to continuing to work with you. I got to run to a live hit right now, so I'm sorry that I have to jump off. But have a great day, and you're going to see a great show tonight and 2 more days. Take care.
Thank you so much, Chair Perez, for your leadership, for making time to be with us on this incredibly busy day for you, and for calling us serial activists. That is a title I will definitely take. Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you to President Holsey for her beginning to our event, the grounding and reminder to center the land and water, the history and the rights of the people who lived here long before the white people came, and to remember and acknowledge always the primacy and leadership of Indigenous peoples in the environmental movement. If you're just tuning in, as many have, I'm Michelle Dietrich, chair of the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council. We're very glad you're here and glad to have this opportunity to share with you how the council got started, how you can connect, and our successes. And after I talk about that for a little while, we are going to move into our very first panel discussion. So how did we get here? As Chair Perez noted, he said happy anniversary, and that's because a year ago today, there was no DNC Environmental and Climate Crisis Council. We were just on the cusp of being established. It's a testament to how important environmental justice and climate issues are to Americans today. That from that beginning, now today, we have more than 5,000 people on this, on this call, in this Zoom meeting, and that our momentum is incredibly strong. So how did we get here? Along with 50 co-sponsors among my colleagues at the DNC, and with support from wonderful partner organizations, including Sunrise, Our Revolution, Greenpeace 350, PDA, Climate Hawks, Sierra Club, and many, many others, we were able to get a resolution passed to establish this council in late 2019. Our goal is to build the environmental movement in the party and advocate for bold, ambitious climate and environmental policy. We've identified some key objectives to move us forward on that path. to organize democratic environmental caucuses in every single state and territory, all 57 of them, and then connect them. In fact, you can go to our website, dncclimate.org right now, and check out the state environmental caucuses list there and connect with yours if there is one. If there isn't, we are working with some states already to help support their organizing work to create one. We also are advocating, as I've said, for bold science-based environmental and climate policies. And we're working to strengthen environmental voting engagement and candidacies, participation and elected leadership in public office and party leadership by those who care deeply about the environment, and also crucially, by those in the front line and vulnerable communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and less resourced, who are disproportionately harmed by climate change and who've already been leading on these issues for decades. For too long, solutions to climate and environmental problems have left out the people most impacted by them. Our structure is intentionally promotes inclusion, diversity, a just transition, environmental justice, and science in a policymaking framework. And our board and committees are diverse and full of incredibly dedicated people, geographically diverse too, from across the US, including a youth director, science officer, union members, faith leaders, a public health expert, and more. And I am so grateful to all of them for their crucial support and help with the work we're doing. Let's be clear, the climate crisis is not coming, it is already here. That's what we heard on the months-long national listening tour with which we launched this council. And it's also where we heard the people want Democrats to step up, be bold on climate, and be the party of climate solutions. So we developed a bold, ambitious set of climate and environmental justice policy recommendations to provide a pathway, a policy pathway to a green, sustainable, just future. And along with those allies and partners, a coalition of over 160 organizations and 30,000 individual signers, we were able to significantly move the National Democratic Party platform toward inclusion of the policies that we need to avoid climate chaos. We've also supported development of state environmental caucuses, built a coalition, organized over 20 outreach and listening events, including our July live streamed roundtable, which has nearly 200,000 views. So what's next? We're just getting started with electing Democrats up and down the ballot, beginning with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, flipping the US Senate, and then continuing to work with the Biden-Harris administration to help with their work in ensuring that the bold, transformative climate and environmental justice policies that science and the scale of this crisis demand are in fact adopted. So stay tuned in. We have more live streams coming up. September 22nd, one on building the climate coalition from grassroots to the DNC. And later this fall, we have another plan on how to achieve some of the ambitious targets in the Biden climate plan and the DNC platform. Let's stay connected. Sign up for updates at our website at dncclimate.org/updates. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thank you. We are now about to start our first panel discussions. And for the many folks just tuning in, I want to welcome you to this meeting of the DNC Environment and Climate Council. I'm Michelle Dietrich. Our panelists include Danielle Deiseroth, Climate Data Analyst for Data for Progress, Paulette Jordan, Democratic nominee for US Senate in Idaho, who is also the Director of Native American Engagement for the Council, Costa Constantanides, Chair of the New York City Council Committee on Environmental Protection and former candidate for Queensborough President, and Ilona Duverge, co-founder of Movement School. So we're going to be talking for about the next half hour about why Democrats should run on climate change and how. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our first panelist, Danielle Deiseroth. Again, she's climate data analyst at Data for Progress. She focuses on polling and analysis for their climate portfolio and contributes to polling research across the organization. Previously, she was on the campaign trail for over a year as a member of the Bernie Sanders National Advance Team, where she led media and logistics and surrogate trips. A native of Pittsburgh, Danielle graduated from Columbia in 2018 with a degree in chemical engineering and a minor in earth and environmental engineering. Hello, Danielle, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much, Michelle. It's an honor to be here and to share with you today some of our exciting polling about why Democrats should be running on a progressive climate platform.
I know you've been doing great research on how running on climate is a winning strategy for Democrats, and including in some surprising places. So I'm really glad that you're here to share some of those findings with us.
Absolutely. We have some really exciting data from very closely contested races in battleground states that shows that climate policies are popular among these crucial voters.
Well, please go ahead, and we're looking forward to hearing. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who are just tuning in, my name is Danielle Deiseroth, and I am the Climate Data Analyst at the think tank Data for Progress. Today, I will be discussing some of our recent findings that show why Democrats should champion progressive climate policies to transform our country and win up and down the ballot this November. Over the past few months, Democrats both in Congress and on the campaign trail have introduced climate legislation that bears the markings of the progressive climate movement. Climate activist groups like the Sunrise Movement and NY Renews, progressive leaders like Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and policy experts like the former Jay Inslee staffers at Evergreen Action have advocated for measures that were adopted by the plans such as the Biden campaign's Build Back Better plan, the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis Report, Senator Harris and Representative Ocasio-Cortez's new Climate Equity Act, and the DNC Climate Council's policy agenda. All of these policies adopt an approach that sets standards for transforming America to a clean energy economy, invests in this clean energy transformation, and achieves justice for the communities that are on the front lines of climate change. If Democrats win this November, they will face an historic opportunity to pass these bold climate policies. And our polling from Data for Progress shows that voters overwhelmingly support these ambitious climate plans. As part of a July survey, we asked voters about these transformational climate policies. We asked voters if they would be more likely to support a presidential candidate who pledges to achieve 100% clean energy by 2035 and create millions of new jobs in clean energy. Overall, a majority of voters say they would be more likely to support a presidential candidate that makes this pledge. And this proposal is bipartisan. A majority of Democrats say they would be more likely to support this candidate, as well as a plurality of independent and Republican voters. We also found that a majority of all voters support major proposals from the Biden-Sanders Unity Climate Task Force, including creating millions of new union jobs in clean energy, making historic investments in the sustainable infrastructure projects, creating an environmental justice fund to serve historically underrepresented communities on the front lines of pollution and climate change, and achieving a 100% clean electricity grid by the year 2035. All of these major proposals have been adopted by the Biden campaign in their latest climate and environmental justice plans. A majority of all voters also support ensuring 40% of clean energy infrastructure and development spending goes to disadvantaged communities. This is a pillar of both the Biden Environmental Justice Plan and the DNC Climate Council's policy agenda. This policy was championed by environmental justice activists across the country. But these policies aren't just popular in big cities and on the coast. We've also found that these progressive climate policies are popular among battleground and Senate swing state voters. As part of a July survey, we asked voters in the closely contested states of Maine, Arizona, North Carolina, and Iowa if they support Joe Biden's new plan to invest $2 trillion over the next 4 years in new clean energy spending. Overall, a majority of voters in these battleground states say they support this plan. A majority of these battleground voters also support an equity screen on all new major federal infrastructure investments to ensure that the funding will go to the communities that need it the most. This is another key component of the Biden Environmental Justice Plan. It's clear that this November, voters are putting climate change on the ballot. Democrats should take this historic opportunity to address the climate crisis by backing policies that will create millions of new good-paying jobs, transform America to a clean energy economy, and create a sustainable future for our children and for our most vulnerable communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That is such encouraging, interesting, and important research, and it really sets the framework for our entire discussion going forward. We're going to bring you back for a panel discussion a little bit later with Paulette Jordan, but right now, I am very, very delighted to introduce Costa Constantanides, New York City Council member, and chair of the New York City Council Committee on Environmental Protection. So delighted that he is here. In the last 7 years, he's passed more than 36 bills focused on clean air, renewable energy, and shrinking New York's carbon footprint. Last year, he helped pass a really important piece of legislation, the Climate Mobilization Act, the largest carbon emissions reduction ever mandated by a city, which is considered a Green New Deal for New York City. Most recently, he ran for Queens Borough President with a focus on making the nation's 11th most populous county the leader on fighting climate change. And as a former county commissioner, I have a special appreciation for that. Though borough presidents are largely considered ceremonial positions in New York, Costa sought to rethink the office's budgetary, land use, and advocacy powers to invest in sustainable building and renewable energy. Among his proposals were to transform a vacated Rikers Island into a hub for renewable power and other sustainable infrastructure. I really like this, which would allow for the closure of dirty facilities and environmental justice communities. He lives in Astoria, Queens, with his wife and son. And I'm so glad that you're here.
Michelle, thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Almost good evening. I want to thank by really thanking Michelle and the entire Climate Council for your tireless advocacy and amazing work, and the DNC for letting me to speak today. We're at a critical moment in our country's history. And it's great to be amongst friends and people who believe in science. Unlike the current administration, that has turned the EPA into the Elegant Pen Association, which only seems to use their pens to roll back environmental legislation on a daily basis. So it's so great to be here with all of you. My name is Costa Constantanides. I represent the Astoria, Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, a little bit of Woodside and Long Island City here in Queens, New York. My neighborhood is the reason why we need Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. We need to lead the fight on climate change. Here in Queens, we've seen environmental racism firsthand and the impacts that it brings. 20 years ago, when California was having rolling blackouts, they came to our community and said, we need to site power plants in your backyard. And they used scare tactics of not having enough power to ensure that right next to the largest public housing development in the country, Queensbridge Houses, that they would put a dirty peaker plant there. And with that came the dirtiest power plant in New York State. It was cited with no environmental review. And the residents there were told that it was only going to be 3 years until we stabilized our power and no longer needed it. Well, more than 20 years later, it's old enough to vote. And yet it's still running next to the Queensbridge houses, the Astoria houses, and the Ravenswood houses. And during Hurricane Sandy in Western Queens, where did it flood? Well, it flooded in Western Queens next to the Queensbridge houses, the Ravenswood houses, and the Astoria houses. We see environmental racism right here in our own backyard. We see policy failures of racism and broken promises And as an elected official, as someone who lived in the community, that's why I decided to get involved and run on climate. We needed to ensure that we have a brighter future for everyone. That's why we passed the Climate Mobilization Act last year, despite big special interests fighting back against it. That's why we have passed some of the strongest environmental justice laws in the country in New York City, because we need to ensure that all communities are heard and respected and protected by our laws. And that's why I'm so excited about the Climate Council's plans and having Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, because we need that renewable energy future now more than ever. When you look at Rikers Island and the possibilities there once it's vacated, of turning it into 100 acres of solar that can be enough to close every power peaker plant that was open that 20 years ago. So those communities that have been over-policed and over-polluted will now have relief. It is so very important that we push forward a real agenda based on science, based on environmental justice, based on ensuring that every community is part of the process and is heard and protected. Because and these are crucial goals, but they're goals that our Vice President, soon to be President, stands for, and the Climate Council is fighting for. You know that Chair Perez talked about just being serial activists. Well, we need serial activists now more than ever, because we need to ensure that in every community we have solar panels on our schools, like we've done here in my district. That we're putting science labs in our schoolyards. I mean, in our school buildings, and that we're ensuring that science is the basis of what we've done. Right here in Queens was the epicenter of COVID, and we saw the same communities that were impacted by environmental racism and injustice were impacted by COVID as well in the largest way here in Queens. We were the epicenter of the epicenter. So now more than ever, we need a president that stands on science, a president that believes in a renewable energy future, and a president to fight for that renewable energy future with us and with everyone here. So I'm honored to be with you all, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today.
The honor is absolutely ours. And you spoke so compellingly of that confluence, that intersectionality of so many different kinds of harms that need to be dealt with holistically. And we need to dismantle the system, the systemic racism, the systemic oppression. And I think you really honed in on something that's crucial to me, which is we cannot fight climate change without also fighting racism. And I am guessing that our next speaker, the wonderful Ilona Duverge, may also have some things and some really important thoughts on that subject. I am so glad to be introducing her. She is the co-founder of the Movement School, born in the Dominican Republic and grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Being formerly undocumented, Ilona has dedicated her work to ensuring justice and opportunities for all. Ilona co-founded Movement School after working on AOC's 2018 race as a way to train more young BIPOC, young people and people of color and Black and Indigenous people from working class backgrounds in efforts to create a more inclusive democracy. She is also a campaign advisor for Justice Democrats, working with candidates like Kara Eastman, Jamal Bowman, and more. Ilona recently also served as the field director for AOC's re-election campaign, and we know how that turned out. So Ilona, I hope you can talk to us about why we need to run on climate and also maybe a little bit about how. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ilona Duverge. I'm the co-founder of Movement School. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Michelle, for inviting me to be part of the first ever Climate Council panel. This is a historic first step. It gives me so much hope that resolving the climate crisis will be at the forefront of our efforts to win in November and beyond. And I think all of us on this panel can agree that it's about time, because 10 years. We have 10 years before we pass the point of no return. And as our current leadership continues to believe that climate change is a myth and lack the political courage to enact bold solutions, youth from around the country are mobilizing to prepare to fight for their future. And every day, the fight for a Green New Deal is growing stronger. But we can't do it alone. We need our voices to be heard from the streets to the halls of Congress, all the way to the White House. And we need to learn how to use the intersection between organizing for a Green New Deal and electoral campaigns to build not only people power, but political power. And we need to learn the skills and the tactics to create community-centered organizing strategies that not only power progressive wins across the country, but ensures that those closest to the pain are closest to that power. And now, research shows that running on a bold climate platform is a winning strategy. But I want to be clear. It is not a winning strategy if we do not honor the history, the trauma, and the pain that working class people, especially our Black and Brown communities, have experienced due to the destructive and racist and classist policies implemented throughout the years. And this is because the Green New Deal is so much more than just climate. It's a framework to be interpreted and molded by the people and for the people. And it does not only focus on the externalities caused by these racist and classist policies, but addresses the root of these systemic issues. And it is a complete transition away from an economy ran by the fossil fuel industry to an economy stimulated by clean energy industry that will create millions of high-paying jobs. And it's also rooted in racial and economic justice by ensuring that communities most impacted are prioritized and benefit from this transition. And lastly, it gives us hope. It gives us a fighting chance at success and a livable future. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to go back to November 2016 because that year showed me that history is not my brother's story, and that Black, Latinx, Indigenous lives don't matter, and that profits are worth more than a human life, and that being queer, working class, or practicing a different religion is threatening. And that's why the Green New Deal is written through a lens that acknowledges how critical it is to understand how our identity functions in the systems carefully crafted to exclude us, and strives to create a new system that is equitable, that is dignified, and that achieves real justice for our communities. So when I think about why Democrats should run on the Green New Deal, it's because we truly are in the battle for our lives, and the people have spoken from the streets all the way to the ballot box.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ilona. That was moving, and I have so much admiration for the work that you do, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. We are going to, just for our speakers, move things around a little bit because of a speaker running a little late from another engagement. She's graciously on her way here. But we are, actually, I just got word that she arrived. So this is definitely a live program, in case you were wondering. So it is my absolute delight to introduce Paulette Jordan. In addition to her really crucial contributions as a DNC Council on Environment and Climate Crisis Executive Board member, she has another small project underway. She is currently running for U.S. Senate in the state of Idaho. She's a former two-term Idaho House representative, and she now aims to unseat a doctrinaire conservative and to make history as the first Native American woman elected to the U.S. Senate. I am very glad to share that Paulette was well-deserved this, recently endorsed by the DSCC, DFA, and the National Women's Political Caucus. She serves her communities as an influential business executive and a voice for the future. And despite tough odds, she unseated an incumbent Republican in the Idaho state legislature. Prior to that election, she won a seat on the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council. Her ancestors regarded stewardship of their homelands as among their most significant responsibilities. Paulette inherited their legacy and is living it. In 2018, she won the Democratic gubernatorial nomination for Idaho, first woman nominated by a major party in that state, and the first Native American woman nominated for governor in U.S. history, and about time. More Idahoans cast their vote for her in 2018 than they had for any other Democratic gubernatorial or congressional candidate in Idaho history. She continues to fight for the rights of rural Idahoans and Native Americans, focusing on environmental justice and equality. Paulette, you bring several crucial perspectives and experience to this discussion, and perhaps you could talk about how we see the impact of the climate crisis in Idaho and how your own run for Senate is shaped by those impacts and the impact of disastrous Republican policies. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. And first, thank you, Chairwoman, for having me. And thank you all for your commitment of seeing that the fight goes on, even as we are living under the dark cloud of COVID-19 and a huge economic crisis. These are difficult times for all of us, and individually we are going through our own processes and how to best interact with this crisis. And at the same time, we are dealing with a parallel threat to our health, our economy, and social justice. And more importantly, above all these things that we're trying to operate within and throughout, we're dealing with the climate crisis, and this is our biggest challenge. But speaking from our state, Idaho's climate is changing. Snowpack is melting earlier in the year, and the flow of meltwater into streams during the summer is declining. In the coming decades, streams will be warmer. Populations of several fish species are declining, like our sacred salmon, our steelhead trout, and other cold water fish. Wildfires are becoming more common, and our deserts are expanding, and water has become less and less available for irrigation for our farming community. And these are huge concerns for us because our land, our waters, our wildlife are facing the limit of what they can endure. And in Idaho, agriculture is a massive industry. And I grew up on my family farmlands, and I know what that means and what that looks like. And it's a very intimate process, and it hits all of our families very hard. But climate change poses challenges, not just for our farmers, their livestock and crops, but we're reducing crop yields, and we know how that impacts our bottom line economy. And the decline in summer stream flow reduces the water available for irrigation. So I'm honored to be recognized by the DNC Climate Council, which has recognized me and as a nationally recognized leader on environmental protection issues. I was born to take on this stewardship role as an Indigenous woman to help lead the way in balancing policy making for our future generations. And I worked hard for years since I was a young child, working with my grandfather, our natural resources ambassador, and both in government and in the private sector to protect our public lands, to work towards proper management of our forests and protect our national resources and our wildlife in Idaho, and speak for the rights of nature. But like many Idahoans, I was raised on the land and on my reservation, my family farm, and I realized how incredibly important it is to remain connected to our land this way. We need leaders who respect our land and who are willing to combat corporate greed in order to address climate change. But we need policy which both protects our environment and contributes to economic prosperity. And we all know that global change starts locally. And this is why I'm so excited to not only run for US Senate and represent our great state and fight for our country, but at the same time, help all those folks down ticket who are running at the local level, because those seats are a real action of change and can do an incredible good if people were able to get out and vote. We know that in Idaho, Haley Climate Action is an example of how neighbors are coming together to affect change at the local level. Haley, and I'm actually nearby Haley. Climate Action is a group of local advocates in Haley, Idaho, started by community leaders who understand that it starts at the local level and have successfully compelled their local city government for a party time sustainability coordinator. They're teaching people how to grow their own food and shop at local farmers markets, and they've started a community composting program. And these advocates for green practices in local businesses are helping to build a sustainable community that we all need and can benefit from. So I hope that we can use these as great examples across the country when we're talking about how we can not only build upon our community health and build on our economy, but look at sustainable living that actually impacts all of the issues that we face with our climate crisis. And looking how to ensuring that clean energy investments occur in every community throughout our country. So our goal is to incentivize the adoption of these technologies in a way that's beneficial to all Idahoans, lowering costs to rooftop solar or more electric transportation options, as all are promising ways to reduce emissions. But right now, these options are not financially accessible to all, and transitioning to a clean energy economy will bring many benefits, including well-paying jobs, but we're just not there yet. And I'm hopeful once we are in office, we can flip our Senate and start paving the way for these protections and ensuring that we have a strong business plan to promote a clean energy system, which is why I love the Green New Deal. And I think there's a way for that. And as a businesswoman working on so many levels to provide these opportunities, I do see this as the way forward. So lastly, Michelle, again, I want to thank you for this time and opportunity. I want to make sure that we are working together on this issue, and whether I'm elected senator or not, I will work to protect our lands and our environment for future generations to come. This is a promise, contract agreement that I have made spiritually before walking into this life in this pathway. But with COVID-19, we are now able to see the fragility of our societal global shocks and attacks, and we need to use the pandemic recovery as a basis for understanding the profound opportunity that we have worldwide to address climate change. So I am hopeful that people will take this issue and concern as a priority on all the campaigns across the country and embed this in their community. And with that, I want to thank you again for your support, Michelle. You've been with me from the very beginning, and I'm so thankful to be part of founding this Environment and Climate Crisis Council with you, knowing the great good that this will continue to contribute to all of us. And thank you for supporting my race for U.S. Senate in Idaho. And for the first time in a long time, we have a real shot at a Senate seat, which has been known as a red state. And we're excited for this opportunity to make history in becoming Idaho's first female senator. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paulette, and it has been my honor to support you. And I do indeed look forward so much to working with you going forward. And I'm really glad that we're going to continue the conversation just a little bit longer. We're bringing back Danielle Deiseroth, Climate Data Analyst for Data for Progress. You gave us such encouraging news earlier. And she and Paulette Jordan, U.S. Senate Democratic nominee in the state of Idaho, which we are going to flip this time. Such good news that we can do this. We're going to have a short conversation. And I want to kick this off by noting one of the many interesting findings in the research that Danielle presented, which is that even in swing states like Arizona, Iowa, and North Carolina, the majority of all voters support Vice President Biden's clean energy investment plan, spending $2 trillion over 4 years on new clean energy infrastructure while growing jobs and transforming the economy. I was glad to hear Paulette really note that you know, that investment grows good paying union jobs. Mm-hmm. And Danielle, I'm curious about whether we have any indications yet about whether this finding might also hold true in other key swing states, battleground states like Michigan or Wisconsin.
Yes, it does hold true. Data for Progress and YouGov Blue actually conducted a study of battleground independent voters in a number of battleground states, including Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we found really similar results to our Senate survey of Arizona, North Carolina, Maine, and Iowa. In the study we did with YouGov Blue, we found 50% of those battleground voters support transitioning away from fossil fuels into a clean energy economy by the year 2035. And nearly 70% of those battleground voters support prioritizing the development of clean energy technologies to benefit communities on the front lines of climate change.
That is such good news. And Paulette, so when we elect Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, those federal investments in clean energy infrastructure, how do you think they could make a difference for the people of the Great Plains and of Idaho?
Well, a common criticism of clean energy technologies like wind and solar is that they impose undue costs of on consumers and the wider economy, and of course that's a problem that is fixable with federal investments in clean energy or clean technology. We all win when we lead with clean energy investment. And I would say that, you know, as we said before, with working with their local unions, you know, creating jobs is really the key here, especially when we're talking about reversing our economy or fixing our economy, facing the financial crisis that we're in. But the clean energy programs that are run by the federal government via the Department of Energy are an example of enormously successful use of taxpayer money, and it needs to continue for the good of our nation and our states. And Idaho is a wind energy state. And as a result of the DOE's long-term research efforts, wind turbine height has increased by 49%, enabling turbines to capture higher speed winds. Breakthroughs in solar have also settled the debate when we're talking about solar energy that can deliver stable, low-cost power in all corners of the country. And lithium-ion battery costs decreased by 70% from 2008 to 2016, making electric vehicles more affordable and marketable. So greater investment in the DOE innovation would continue this track record of success. I also think investing in clean energy also creates jobs for people of all different skill sets and education levels, adding to millions of clean energy jobs across the country and in Idaho. It helps to protect the health of children and counters the real effects of climate change by avoiding fossil fuel-fired power generation. And Congress, both the House and the Senate, in moving in the right direction, should do much, much more. But there's no shortage of opportunities waiting to be tapped by investing in clean energy innovation. And future research, development, and demonstration investments should include efforts to overcome the technical challenges associated with bringing cleaner energy onto the grid and support investments in next generation infrastructure that will deliver a clean energy economy for all.
Thank you for that. There are incredible opportunities. And now we're going to go to 2 quick questions, sort of the panel version of speed dating. So 30 seconds. First one is for Danielle. It's an audience question. People submitted questions in advance. This one is from Justin from Ogden, Utah. And Justin asks, how do we utilize the coming election to get all hands on deck for climate? 30 seconds, Danielle. No pressure.
Well, I think First Lady Michelle Obama said it best last night. We need to vote this November like our lives depend on it. We need to convey to voters that a Biden-Harris administration will listen to scientists and experts and make investments in our country that will not only make our nation a leader in combating climate change on a global scale, but also will create millions of new good-paying jobs for American workers. I think if we convey the urgency and the importance of this climate crisis and the immense opportunities that await us in the clean energy transformation, we will see voters respond very positively and take action at the polls this November.
Thank you. Yes, I think completely agree with that. And we're going to move on to Paulette. One final question from Bruce from New Hampshire. He asks, what messaging on climate appeals to independent and Republican voters who are interested in climate change? Good question for Idaho.
I would say that the energy is cost efficient and cost effective and accessible. We're often working with the monopolies in our state. That is frustrating, especially when you want to be on an independent grid system. And the microgrids, to me, are one of the most optimal ways for our rural communities to have much more effective and efficient energy that is affordable.
Thank you. And you kept it in 30 seconds. And as someone who also lives in a rural community, yeah, microgrids are crucial. I'm really glad you brought up that technology. Thank you so much to Paulette Jordan, U.S. Senate Democratic nominee from Idaho, and Danielle, Senior Climate Data Analyst from Data for Progress. Appreciate your being here and the thoughtful conversation. We are going to move on to our next 2 panelists. And for those newly tuning in, we are discussing how and why Democrats should run on climate change. Thank you so much, Paulette and Danielle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
So we are moving on to our second panel with Costa, Constantanides, and Ilona Duverge. And so glad that we are going to have some time to also talk with you about how and why Democrats should run on climate and on environmental justice. So Costa, polls consistently show climate to be one of the top few issues for voters, especially but not exclusively Democrats. How does that fit with your experience in New York? Do you think that's changed during this era of the pandemic? And yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
And we've seen here in New York City, when Hurricane Sandy struck us, it struck everyone, right? And the Republican neighborhoods in Staten Island, Democratic neighborhoods in Queens, we all were affected. And we all understand that climate change is real. And I think that, and the opportunity for a renewable energy future that'll create good union jobs is one that everyone can get unified behind as Democrats. But we also need to, as Michelle Obama talked about last night, vote like our lives depend on it, because it really does. We have those 10 years. And as Democrats, we believe in science. So we have to do more.
Absolutely. Ilona, I was wondering if you would like to weigh in on that question about whether climate is one of the top few issues for voters, maybe especially with younger voters, and has that changed as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And as Costa mentioned before, a lot of the work that I do with Movement School was around the Green New Deal for public housing. And I saw firsthand how climate change affects our public housing institutions. But not only that, how it affects the people living in public housing. The asthma rates being up, the decrepit conditions in their apartments due to the mold, due to the leaky pipes, due to the crumbling infrastructure, because there's been barely any rehab to these public housing developments, especially since Sandy, and the mold has just gone up, right? So I think that climate change, right, and when we're talking about Green New Deal specifically, it extends beyond just the climate aspect of it. It includes the union paying jobs. It includes racial and economic justice. It includes so much more that it transcends beyond party lines, because everyone can see a little bit of themselves in the Green New Deal. So I absolutely think that it is a major issue for us here in New York City. And I definitely think it's going to be an issue that is driven forward, especially by, and that a lot of young voters especially are going to be looking at for candidates to be championing from the presidential level all the way down ballot.
Thank you. And certainly our experience on the national listening tour really bore out exactly what you're saying. And so we're going to move on to our 30-second questions from the audience. The first one is for Costa. We have a question from Chris in California. He says, or she or they, what is the biggest change over the last few years in your thinking about how Democrats should run on climate issues, locally, statewide, or nationally? Nice small question for 30 seconds. Do you have any thoughts?
I think we just have to be bolder, right? We need to, adopt the real systemic changes that are going to really make a difference. I think that's been the real change. It's things like Renewable Rikers Island, the fight for environmental justice. We can't decouple environmental justice and racial justice. So we have to make sure that we are being bold. I think that's where, for me, the half measures and the half steps have to disappear.
Well, you know that the council and I vehemently agree with you. Thank you so much for that. And Ilona, one quick final question from Carolyn in Michigan. What advice would you give to a first-time candidate who wants to run on climate issues, and here's the kicker, in a purple district? First-time candidate who wants to run on climate issues in a purple district.
Yes. Well, as Danielle mentioned earlier, right, it is extremely effective even in these purple districts, even in these swing states. So one, absolutely run on a bold climate platform unapologetically. But I also think that when a candidate is running, especially on climate policy, especially on a Green New Deal, they need to talk to the community first. They need to understand what a Green New Deal is for their community specifically, because a Green New Deal looks differently in New York. A Green New Deal looks differently in California, it looks different for Texas. It really is a framework to be molded by and for the people. And if you are not taking that into account first, as a first-time candidate, especially running in a local for local office in a purple district, you need to make sure that you're centering those voices and that you're making sure that they're at the forefront of this decision making and how that is going to look like for their district.
Thank you so much for that. I It is so important to listen and to recognize, yes, it's a global issue, but the impacts are very, very local. As someone who flipped a three-term red seat for my county commission race, I did a lot of listening first before I started to run on climate issues successfully. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much to both of you, Ilona and Costa, for being here with us today. Really, really appreciate that. A lot of tremendous hopeful news here. So good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So we are, it's my absolute honor to introduce our next speaker, Tom Steyer. Tom is committed to combating climate change and to putting people in charge of our democracy. After starting and growing a very successful investment firm, he stepped down in 2012 to focus his energy and resources to these causes, politics and the environment. He launched Next Gen America, which we've all heard of, a nonprofit organization that supports progressive positions on climate change, immigration, healthcare, and education, and that has provided jobs and training to so many young people who I personally know. He has served on the board of trustees at Stanford University, and he and his wife signed the Giving Pledge to donate half of their fortune to charity during their lifetime. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. It's an honor for me to be here with so many climate justice champions. The strength of the climate movement itself is reflected on this call. I've been personally working to address our climate crisis for over a decade, but so have many of the people assembled here. We know the devastating effects that climate change has already brought to this country, especially for communities of color who suffer disproportionately from environmental damage. But we've also seen the jobs that clean energy can create and the transformational change in health and prosperity that we can achieve with a clean economy. This is our time, both in terms of the election and after. As Michelle said, I founded one of the largest grassroots organizations in the country, Next Gen America, because I believe in registering and engaging voters. I believe that turnout is the key to a Democratic sweep in November, and especially turning out young people, the most diverse generation in American history. And climate resonates this year in a way it never has before. Our planet's future is on the line, and the choice is stark and clear. Vice President Biden and Senator Harris's leadership and vision for our country is a triumph for climate voters who know that we simply can't afford 4 more years of Trump's recklessness, his negligence, and his fossil fuel cronyism. The Biden plan is the most progressive and aggressive demand for climate action that any president has ever entered office with. But it's more than that. It creates the jobs we need, it builds a sustainable economy, and it delivers a more equitable and just future. It's exactly what's needed now. I've been working with the campaign to do virtual events across the country with voters, from youth activists to business leaders. Everyone has a vested interest in saving our planet because everyone's future depends on it. And that's why so many leaders, activists, and stakeholders love this plan. It's a jobs plan that's also an environmental justice plan, and that's why it resonates so broadly. Vice President Biden has brought people together, union leaders, business leaders, and environmental justice champions, everybody, behind a shared vision for climate justice and urgent climate action. My home state of California has traditionally led the nation in showing how a clean energy economy creates opportunities across communities. We've shown that clean energy is a win-win-win for workers, for consumers, as well as for the planet. That's why I'm so excited for my friend and my home state senator, Kamala Harris, to be the vice presidential nominee. As Attorney General in California, she successfully took on the fossil fuel companies and held them accountable. This is our time. We are in crisis, a crisis of climate, but also of COVID-19, of racial injustice, and of a dramatic economic slowdown and job loss. For us to succeed, we need unity. We need leadership. We need compassion. That's why this moment calls for a President Biden. And that's why I'm so excited as a climate voter and as an American to do everything I can from now until November 3rd to get Vice President Biden and Senator Harris elected. So let's let them know the climate community is here in force. Please take out your phone and text to 30330 the word climate. 30330. No kidding. This is our time. This is the best chance we're ever going to get. Let's come together and win.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. Again, it is an honor to have you here. Your advocacy, your leadership, your support of our Democratic ticket up and down the ballot means so very much. Many of you have joined since the beginning of our live stream. I'm Michelle Dietrich, chair of the DNC Council on Climate and Environment and Climate, established in 2019 to advocate for bold, transformative policies of the Democratic Party. Please stay connected. Go to dncclimate.org and sign up or find your state environmental caucus. We have more live streams and calls to action coming up. Look forward to working with you. And right now, we're going to move to our next speaker. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce Congressman Andy Levin from my own state of Michigan. Andy Levin represents Michigan's 9th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, a crucial district in the 2016 elections. He serves as vice chair at the House Committee on Education and Labor, and also sits on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. For nearly 4 decades before his election to Congress in 2018, Levin was part of the labor movement as a union organizer, advocating for workers' rights, leading Michigan's workforce system as the chief workforce officer, and starting his own small business as a clean energy entrepreneur. It was a business that benefited local governments and businesses all across the state. So grateful for his service. Congressman Levin, we're so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's great to see you in your little box and we're all living in our little box. Great to see Allison Stevens. I don't know who could be seen on, by the council right now. I know people are preparing for the next panel. But listen, friends, I'm a union organizer who went to Congress and immediately became an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. Why? Isn't that supposed to be difficult for a guy from Michigan, a guy from the district where the term Reagan Democrat was literally coined in the suburbs of Detroit? And the answer is no way. Just envision the future at this incredibly difficult moment, this sad moment in our country. Imagine the future we're about to create when we elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, sweep out their Republican enablers, take back the Senate, and build our majority in the House. We're going to begin a new era of climate justice, economic justice, racial and social justice. I'm talking not just about flipping from a Democratic administration to Republican and back and forth. I'm talking about huge swings in American history. Like in 1932, we set our country on a new course. And was it perfect? No. But we built the biggest middle class in the history of the world, and advances in productivity went to working people in this country. In 1980, we took a turn in the wrong direction. And I submit to you, we're kind of still going in Reagan's direction. All benefits are going to the very wealthiest people. We have the kind of racism that saw a president start his campaign in Neshoba County, Mississippi, and subsequent presidents with their Willie Horton ads and everything else, racism used in politics. We're ready to change our direction in that way that happens only every several generations, not every generation even. We're going to tackle climate change, which requires action that is so comprehensive and so fast. We've never done anything like it. but things like my Electric Vehicle Freedom Act, which says we're going to stand up comprehensive systems of high-speed EV charging stations throughout the entire national highway system. And we have to do that for high-speed rail and mass transit and trucking. We have to do it in the built environment, in our homes, our apartment buildings, our factories, our workplaces. We have a chance to launch a new economic era that starts in the communities that have been ignored and includes all of us in good paying union jobs to build a clean energy economy. I mean, let's go. We've got less than 80 days. I don't know, Michelle, how many it is to get every person out there to vote. And it's not about November 3rd anymore, friends. I'm saying we have to win by 10/20/2020. That's 2 weeks before Election Day. Here in Michigan, we're going to make sure every Democrat, everybody who will vote for a climate justice ticket to get out and vote by mail, in person in their township or city hall, or in a drop box. We're going to have everybody voted. We're going to have beaten Donald Trump 2 weeks before Election Day. That's how serious we are. It's about grassroots organizing to save our climate and our planet. Finally, Michelle, I just have to say something personal. You know, the president's talking about opening up ANWR for drilling, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I got arrested with my rabbi and other cultural and civic leaders in Washington, D.C. in 2005, 15 years ago, when George W. Bush was talking about that nonsense. We've got to move away from taking every bit of fossil fuel we can out of the earth. Let's leave the earth be. Let's build up our soils. Let's transform our agriculture. Let's protect our wild places. We've got a beautiful future ahead of us if we seize it. I, for one, am ready to go. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be with you. Such an honor to be part of this event. And I'm looking forward to night 2 of the convention. Night 1 was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Levin. It's always good to hear about the good trouble that you've made in the past and that you are making now, and the strength of your commitment to workers and the climate going together is much needed as a voice. And yes, the news about the Arctic National Refuge and what the person in the White House wants to do to it is absolutely devastating. Thank you for being here with us today. And I would now like to kick off our second panel. I'm going to introduce the moderator of the second panel, Jane Kleeb, who is a friend and someone I have great admiration for. She's an experienced grassroots organizer, manager, political strategist, and nonprofit entrepreneur, recently profiled by PBS in a film called Blue Wind on a Red Prairie. She really deeply understands the need to connect issues that rural and urban communities are facing to politics in order to win elections in Nebraska and in many other states like Nebraska. She started her term as the Nebraska Democratic Party chair in December 2016, but her activism and advocacy go back much further. In 2010, she founded the grassroots group Bold Nebraska, leading farmers, ranchers, and Native allies in an effort to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. Her organizing style earned her the title Keystone Killer, which I love. Bold Nebraska expanded into a national alliance, and she also has a background with youth organizing earlier in her career as executive director of the Young Democrats of America. She has served in public office as both a commissioner for national and community service and a school board member. And she is the author of a terrific new book, which I have read with and was enlightened by, called Harvest the Vote: How Democrats Can Win Again in Rural America. Jane, I'm going to kick off this panel with an initial question for you. And Thank you for moderating it. You are a dedicated activist, organizer, leader, and more. What is your observation about this moment we are in around climate and the opportunities in front of us in Nebraska, the Plains states, and rural areas?
Well, first of all, thank you, Chair, for inviting me and for creating this council. You had the courage and the bold move to take that next step that many other people had been talking about for years. And so thank you. I wanted to talk about two things, land justice and the frontline fighters. If we're going to solve climate change, we have to confront land justice. And the reality is African Americans used to own 15% of the farmland in our country over 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, they owned 15%. Today, it's less than 0.5%. That is not land justice. And when you look at Native Americans and the land that they have in their control that is being farmed and monitored by tribal individuals and tribal farmers and ranchers, that is essentially about 25% of the land that they own. So if we're going to confront climate change, we have to start making sure that land is back in the hands of those who are closest to it and that will take good care of it and is not in the hands of monopoly and corporate agriculture. So that's number one. Number two is we really need to start funding and start listening to the frontline fighters. So you know that I've spent the last decade organizing unlikely alliances of farmers, ranchers, and tribes and climate advocates all together. So folks in DC as well as us in the Plains states confronting pipelines. And if DC hadn't talked to us, if they only ran a campaign inside the halls of Congress, we would have lost Keystone XL. We won because those of us on the front lines combined with those in DC really amplified each other's voices and supported each other to make sure that we were running a winning campaign. We now need to do that for clean energy. One of the concerns that I have is that we're going to go gangbusters on clean energy, which we need to do, without taking into account the land and the people who live there, whose lives will be disrupted in so many levels on having to create this new clean energy infrastructure. Whether it's transmission lines or whether it's wind or whether it's solar, we can't make the same mistake big oil did 50 years ago or 100 years ago when they were creating that energy infrastructure. We need to make sure that farmers, ranchers, union workers, and climate advocates, along with the big clean energy corporations, are all at the table together building out that clean energy future. If we don't do that, we're going to end up in a situation where folks' land is being taken advantage of and they're not profiting at the same ways that big corporations are on the clean energy revolution. I know that as Democrats, we can lead the way, which is why it's so important to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. So I think I'm going to kick it right off into our panel. And so, Chair, I just want to make sure I see Keith Ellison is on. I just want to make sure that Jay Inslee's on too, or I can start with Keith.
Start talking now.
I was trying to check in with. Yes. Is Governor Inslee on?
I'm on.
Okay, great.
All
right.
Hey,
I'm going to do your introduction first.
Okay.
Hold on a second, Representative Attorney General Ellison, you're going to come next. First, let me do a quick introduction to the climate governor, which is what he will always be known as, Jay Inslee, who ran a great campaign for president and inserted climate change into that campaign, which quite frankly, I don't think if he had not entered the race, we would not have the type of climate plans that were lifted up and are now being championed by Joe Biden. As the two-term governor of Washington, Governor Inslee has firmly established the state as a national leader in fighting climate change. He has set the state on a path to a carbon-neutral electric grid by 2030, and for that grid to be powered with 100% clean energy by 2045. He created the Clean Energy Fund, which is a model for economic development aligned with climate change goals, while creating clean energy, good-paying jobs across the state. Jay and his wife, Trudy, have raised their 3 sons and are now very proud grandparents of 4 little Inslees. Before I kick off a question to you, Governor Inslee, I also want to say that your chair is one of the rock stars in the State Party Association, Chair Tina Padalowski. We love her dearly. She's a good friend, so you're in good hands winning up and down the ticket with her in your state. But under your leadership, since 2013, the state of Washington has become a pioneer in transitioning to clean energy economy. And there's so many success stories in Washington, which clearly we could take up a whole hour just talking about that. But I think what we really want to know is, how can the federal government and the state government be working hand in hand to solve climate change? And what do you think are some of the most significant successes that you helped deploy in Washington to solve climate change?
Well, thanks for asking. But before I answer that question, let me ask one. What do we do when it's 130 degrees in Death Valley, hottest temperature in 107 years on the planet Earth? It's 125 degrees in Baghdad, and it's 100 degrees in northern Siberia. We elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I am so appreciative of your leadership, Jane, and everybody. To be on a panel with Keith Ellison is a joy. Peggy Shepard, who's won the Rachel Carson Award. I love being on this team. I want to say that. And I want everybody who's listening to this to be on this team. So I hope everybody who's out there right now, if you can show you're a climate voter for Joe, and by please texting climate to 30330, climate to 30330. Thank you. Please join this. We've got to make this happen. Well, you know, I wasn't prepared for you to ask me that question. Before I answer it, can I tell you why I'm so excited about the Biden-Harris ticket? Then I'll answer the question. Look, this thing is a plan that is perfect for the moment. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am what Joe Biden has come up with on his energy plans. And I'll just tell you, there's three things they have done that are very similar to what we've done in our state, but on a more massive national scale. Number one, the scale of their plan of $2 trillion is both enormous and adequate. And the fact that they're thinking in these terms with the scale of this is just thrilling to me. And I'll tell you what, these are going to be good union paying jobs, right? These are not just physicists and rocket scientists. These are electricians and carpenters and steel workers and sheet metal workers and iron workers. Nothing can be more exciting to me than people going to work in a good union paying job at huge scale. Number two, what the president has put forward, or the vice president has put forward, is a standard-based plan, and that's what we've done in my state. We have come up with standards that are actually enforceable. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are legally enforceable standards to have 100% clean electrical grid by 2030. We have a similar, even not as ambitious as that, requirement in our state for a clean electrical grid. These are things that can be enforced in court. They can be enforced in a regulatory system, and that is meat on the bone. And I'm just thrilled to see him adopt this standards-based approach. Third, what he has done, again, mirroring what we've done in our state, which is to make sure that we are growing equity and we are attacking racial injustice at the same time we're attacking climate change. And he has imbued his entire plan. Every time he's picked up a tool against climate change, he's picked up a tool against social inequality and racial inequality at the same time. He's guaranteed that 40% of the infrastructure goes to communities of color and poverty. We have a similar sort of targeting. He's making sure that union jobs are preferred. We've done the same thing in our state, where we basically insist on project labor agreements so that unions have an opportunity to do good work for working people. And he's imbued a system of economic justice throughout this plan. So what I would say is the kind of things that we have done in our state successfully are the kind of things I think we're going to do nationally under his leadership. And I'm just so appreciative of it. I could not be, there's only, one thing that could be more perfect. I guess I could be in the White House. I'm not going to be in the White House. But I tell you what, we're going to have a great champion, and that is Joe Biden. And I'm just tickled pink, and I can stay home and take care of my grandchildren. So that's good news all the way around. Closing comment, really serious about this. We need your help. Text us with your intentions to join this team to climate to 30330. Help us out. Let's go elect Joe and Kamala.
Thank you, Governor. And stick around because we're going to do a panel. So I have a question for Keith and then a question for Peggy, and then we're going to do a little panel with questions back and forth with you guys. So up next is Keith Ellison, Attorney General Keith Ellison, formerly Representative Keith Ellison, ran for DNC chair, came so close with a lot of progressive backing. He is a fellow board member of Our Revolution, so we get to serve together on Our Revolution. He's cut from the cloth of Senator Wellstone, one that is guided by generosity, inclusion, respect, and grassroots activism. In Congress, his many legislative accomplishments included passing progressive provisions to protect credit card holders from abusive practices and to protect the rights of renters. He also served as the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which made sure that he handed that off to over 100 members as he was co-chair. And I'll say that he was a progressive long before the cool kids started to be called progressives. And so he paved the way there as well. Before being elected to Congress, Attorney General Keith Ellison served 4 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and he was also a lawyer focusing on civil rights. He was the first African-American and the first Muslim-American to be elected statewide in the great state of Minnesota, which also has a great party chair, Ken Martin, who we all love. So it is my absolute honor to bring in Keith Ellison to talk a little bit about what attorney generals can do. So, you know, Attorney General Ellison, you know that there are now a new entire crop and field of progressive attorney generals all across the country that are really working hand in hand and are forming a network together in order to help solve some climate change issues. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about some of the major environmental and climate harms that are happening in Minnesota and how your role as Attorney General is going to help solve some of those.
Well, thanks so much, Jane. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to discuss this critical issue that truly is, I think, an existential threat to all of humanity, and really emphasize the urgency. So proud that the Biden-Harris team is prioritizing this issue. I think that this is the boldest presidential initiative on climate that we have seen yet today. And Jay is absolutely right. Jay's not just a pretty good governor, and I'd say excellent governor. He's actually a pretty good writer. Jay, remember that book you wrote about climate, man? You know, he's been on this for so many years. And I think that I'm so grateful, Jay, we're friends, and that you are still an activist, though you're there in the State House. Let me answer your question. One of the great state attorney generals is actually from Jay's state, Washington. Bob Ferguson and I just filed a lawsuit today to stop President Trump from trying to manipulate the United States Postal Service to try to get an advantage in the election. So state attorney generals, I believe, are an underutilized resource. And several of us, including Maura Healey in Massachusetts, Tish James in New York, in Peter Nerone in Rhode Island, we have filed lawsuits challenging the basic concept of climate change and abuse. But in Minnesota, we've taken a slightly different tack. Even though we are targeting the issue of climate chaos, we're using the consumer laws to get at it by showing that ExxonMobil, Koch brothers, Koch Industries, and the American Petroleum Institute lied to consumers about the effect of climate change. Let me just show, I got a slide for you. Can we get that first slide up? Show everybody that slide. Is that possible? Uh-oh. Are y'all gonna really make me do this? I can't get the slide up. Anyway, let me read this to you because that slide is right there. Somebody ought to be clicking a button, but it's not there. So let me just say, ExxonMobil we have an internal document from them, October 16th, 1979, in which they admit that their behavior is contributing to CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which has increased since the beginning of industrialization caused by them, and that now it's 15% greater than it was many years ago. And this increase in fossil fuel combustion will cause warming of the Earth's surface. The present trend of fossil fuel consumption will cause dramatic environmental effects before the year 2050. That's according to their internal document, which I was trying to show to your people. Let me show you another document, which goes to show that they lied about it. Because even though they knew that in 1979, they had a public campaign, a PR campaign saying, doomsday is canceled. Doomsday is canceled again. They move on to say, who told you the Earth was warming? Chicken Little. So they liken people who are raising the issue of climate catastrophe, like all of us, like so many, they likened us to Chicken Littles. And then the most serious problem with catastrophic global warming is it may not be true. So they knew it was true, but they lied and said that it may not be true, trying to fool the public. That, we believe, is false advertising. You can't do that in Minnesota. You cannot lie about the effects of your product, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's cars, whether it's financial products, or whether it's the effects of burning fossil fuels like petroleum. And attorneys general all over this country are picking up on a lot of different theories. We're going with consumer abuses, false advertising claims, and deceitful trade practices. Others are attacking them in terms of the investor accountability, and there are other ways to hold them accountable. But state attorney generals are using existing law to say, you have deceived the public, you have damaged our environment, and you're hurting people, and we're not going to sit around and let you do it. Yes, they're hurting Minnesota. Minnesota has suffered catastrophic climate change, whether you talk about native peoples who are growing wild rice and are having very deleterious effects to their growing season and their crop, or farmers in southern Minnesota growing corn or soybeans or whatever, or whether you're talking about communities of color who are experiencing heightened rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases, or you're talking about all Minnesotans. Do you know we had more mosquitoes this year than we normally have? And let me tell you, more mosquitoes in Minnesota is like more snow in Minnesota. We already got more than we're looking for, right? And so yet they were tough out there in July, August. The people know it, and that is linked. It's proven and demonstrable and linked to global climate change, something that ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, and the American petroleum industry paid for and sponsored a lie campaign, and we're going to hold them accountable for it. That's what attorneys generals are doing. So that's what we want you to do. If you're out there and you're listening to this show, please engage your attorney general and say, what are you doing to address climate change? We know you can do things. Bob Ferguson is doing something. Ellison's doing something. Maura Healey's doing something. What's your attorney general doing? We can do a lot, and we're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. As the people's lawyer, you brought the evidence to make the case, which I appreciate. You need to stick around too, because we're going to have some panel questions. I'm going to now introduce everybody to Peggy Shepard. If you're a climate advocate, you probably know her name. She's the executive director and co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice. Peggy is also, she runs two different offices. She straddles between both Manhattan and Washington, D.C. She's been running successful grassroots campaigns since 1988, and she's become a national leader in advancing both environmental and climate justice issues. She's a graduate of Howard University. She received the 10th Annual Heinz Award for the Environment, and she won the Rachel Carson Award from Audubon. She has honorary doctorates from both Smith College and Lawrence University. Peggy also served on the Environmental Council of the DNC's Platform Committee. She played a key role in making sure that the DNC's Platform Committee actually had strong climate planks. And I will say from the 2016 to the 2020, it does. And that's because of the work that Peggy and Michelle and so many others worked on. Peggy, thank you for being part of this panel. We're going to bring in your perspective from being a both grassroots advocate and a policy expert. And so in this time of the pandemic, some long overdue attention is finally being given to environmental justice and systematic racism and how both of those issues work hand in hand. Could you please talk a little bit about those two critical issues, and how you think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will lift up our communities while solving climate change?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Michelle, for all your hard work on the platform. Well, tonight I'm here to speak for myself, and like many other individuals in this country, I'm experiencing a moment, one of expectation, buoyed by the spectacle of our firm and unrelenting demand for recognition, equity, and justice, and to end the poison of racism and injustice that has contaminated systemically all levels of our society and government, and left communities in my city, left them behind with a legacy of pollution that has been fatal during this COVID pandemic to many of the 71% of African Americans living with air pollution and over 80% of Latinos in this country. And that's why we need the Biden-Harris team to address these issues. Now, I'm an African-American woman, an environmental justice activist for the past 32 years, who lives and works in Harlem and New York. I'm executive director and co-founder of a dynamic organization called We Act for Environmental Justice. It works to organize and empower community residents and members in uptown Manhattan neighborhoods through our federal policy in DC. And, you know, New York neighborhoods are like other communities and tribal areas in this country that are impacted by disproportionate and cumulative exposure to multiple contaminants in air, water, and soil. And these exposures put African Americans, people of color, and indigenous folks at higher risk of chronic illness and shortened life expectancy due to the increasing levels of environmental rollbacks by the current administration. Now, I understand why we need Joe Biden's plan. We need it to secure environmental justice and equitable economic opportunity, to center justice and equity in all policies. And, you know, we have a lot of concerns. What do we do about air toxics that are leading to thousands of premature deaths every year? Well, you know, communities have been calling for new monitoring in frontline and fence line communities. That's what Joe Biden's talking about. And there's a whole new legion of citizen scientists who are eager to assess environmental quality in their air and water. And Biden would do this. He would establish interagency teams to address targeted issues and partner directly with those affected communities. He would establish an interagency climate equity task force to help resolve the most challenging and persistent pockets of climate inequity in vulnerable communities and tribal nations in this country. Now, it's clear Biden wants to go back to decisions that are driven by data and science, as we all do. So he can create a data-driven climate and environmental justice screening tool. Now, this tool would identify communities threatened by the cumulative impacts of multiple stresses of climate change, economic and racial inequality, and environmental pollution, the kind that we find in most environmental justice areas, also known as sacrifice zones, places without the complexion for protection, as Dr. Bob Bullard would say. Now, I know that in flood-prone areas, folks are really eager to help Biden create his national crisis strategy to address climate disasters, and also the plan to prioritize equitable disaster risk reduction. And we need that before the next hurricane hits. Now, we know that divestment has killed so many communities. And so Biden's plan would commit 40% of climate and environmental investments to frontline and vulnerable communities. And as a proud New Yorker, I'm happy to say that this plan was influenced by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that my organization and so many coalitions and allies in New York fought for over the past few years. And Biden would invest heavily in eliminating legacy pollution in communities of color, rural and low wealth areas. Legacy pollution that has to be resolved so we can move ahead. So, you know, I'm excited that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have listened to the analysis and the challenges expressed by environmental justice and climate activists. The Biden plan and the Harris Climate Equity Act are both committed to process that gives advocates a seat at the table by establishing new offices and senior White House advisors on climate and environmental justice. And you know, the act also aims to center accountability and equity impacts in federal climate and environmental action. It's what we need. And you know, for accountability, we need our advocates, our environmental justice groups, our big green groups. We need to align key goals. And we need allies like my brothers and sisters in the reemergent National Black Environmental Justice Network and the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum. Those networks are impatient for Biden's overhaul of EPA's Civil Rights Compliance Office, which has been AWOL for decades. So they're ready to go. And they're ready to go to DC to hold a new administration accountable for revising the executive order on environmental justice and submitting annual progress reports to the White House. But you know, I feel, and I think so many of us do, that this moment holds promise, expectations, and it's our time and responsibility to take action and ensure that we can achieve these goals. Now, the choice, it's stark, it's inescapable. We must take collective action before it's too late, because lives are at stake and so many have died. When we see something wrong, we must say something. We must stand up. We must do something. We must elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and we must vote.
Thank you so much, Peggy. So I'm actually going to combine two questions that folks sent in, one from Jeremiah from Indiana and one from Elizabeth in Maryland, and have Governor Inslee, Attorney General Ellison, and Peggy, I'll have you guys all respond to this, with Governor Inslee going first. So I'm going to combine these two. What can either Congress do? Let's say we win both the keep our House majority and we win back Senate, which I know we can do. What can Congress do, and or what can the Biden-Harris White House do in the first 100 days to make the most impact on climate change? What do you think, Governor Inslee?
Well, first, get rid of the filibuster so we can do all the things that Congress needs to do, and that's an important issue. And you know, I hope we'll all get behind that at the right moment. Well, listen, both the executive and the congressional branch have lots of work they can do, and this is one of the wonderful things. Even without congressional action, the vice president can do loads on this subject. Look what this administration has done. They have tried to stop us from embracing zero emission vehicles. They've tried to stop us from embracing the energy efficiency standards through the waiver of California. Joseph Biden can stop those efforts with a stroke of the pen so that we can move forward as states dramatically. He can take actions on public lands big time to prevent fossil fuel drilling big time. And he'll be smart enough to figure out how to do that, unlike Donald Trump, who every time he tries to repeal something is too incompetent to do it, thank goodness. So Biden will know how to do it. By the way, Keith Ellison, Bob Ferguson, they announced they were going to sue on our state's behalf. 90 minutes later, the postmaster said, I give up. I'm not going to do any of that stuff anymore. So they heard Keith's footstep and Bob's footsteps coming. So that's good. We still need a lawsuit, though, by Keith, because we can't trust these guys at all. So I'm glad you're on it. So there's all kinds of things the executive can big time energy efficiency standards throughout the federal government so that the federal government can lead. So even without the Senate, the vice president can be extremely effective. Now, Congress, they can pass every single thing that Joe Biden sends to the Hill. And we should see that they do that. The kind of things that he has proposed are both effective and achievable politically. One of the things I like about Biden's plan is it's sufficiently bold enough, but also electorally practical to be able to pass through the Senate. It appeals to every part of our constituency, from the labor community to the environmental justice community, to the business development entrepreneurs. It's got something for everybody in this. So what he has done is can pass We just got to get over that little filibuster thing, and we'll pass through the both chambers.
Thank you. How about you, Attorney General Ellison? What do you think is the most significant thing they can do in the first 100 days of their administration?
Well, let me tell you, there's a long list of things they can do. We have been filing lawsuits challenging the Trump administration almost every other day. And I'm talking about environmental things, whether it's emissions, no matter what, it's all kinds of rules regarding pipelines. There's no shortage of things that we could do. But you asked what's the most important thing we could do, and here is what it is. He can speak about the importance of taking climate action. He can literally green light the Congress, state legislatures, city councils, community groups. He can tell all of our big green groups like Sierra Club and this Isaac Walton and all the ones, conservation voters, all those folks, and say, look, the administration backs you and we're going to support you. He can say to Peggy Shepard, you know what? You're advocating for environmental justice. He can go to Bob Bullard and say, you want to do something about environmental racism. The president thinks that you are right, and the president has got your back on this. So you know what? There's a lot of administrative and legislative action to take, but no one person, even the president, can solve this existential crisis. But what the president can do is to greenlight the multitude of energy all over this country and unleash that talent. I'm gonna tell you another thing he can do. He can say to people like Bolsonaro, you're gonna stop burning up the Amazon. I mean, one of the catastrophic effects of a guy like Trump is that every bad dictator, every wicked little mean leader around the world says, hey, if this guy's doing it, I can do it. I can burn up the Amazon. I can bomb the Yemeni people back into the Stone Age, as this guy in Saudi Arabia is doing. I can do all kinds of bad things to the environment because, hey, the US is doing it and they're the biggest economy in the world and the strongest military. I can do what I want to do. He can set an international tone, rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, and those things alone will be of tremendous benefit. All the technical stuff like legislation, rules, we can do that, but the tone setting, I think, is the most important thing.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. And Peggy, bring us home. What do you think is the most significant thing that they can do in those first 100 days?
Well, accountability begins on day one, and he's really got to lay out his vision and priorities and signal a hard break from the past. Fortunately, we've got to begin to get COVID-19 under control. And so that's got to be his first priority. And we also need to look at the Interagency Environmental Justice Working Group to focus on addressing COVID-19 and its impact on vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, because those are the communities right now that have been the hardest hit. And we really need to develop an entire federal family response to this most significant health crisis. There should be a national moratorium on electrical and water shutoffs until there is a cure for COVID-19. And of course, as my colleagues tonight have said, we need to signal that it's time for progressive climate legislation, and the Senate has got a great report. The House has got legislation pending and waiting to go, and there needs to be a signal for it to go all lights ahead.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Chair Dietrich. Thank you, Vice Chair Green. I didn't get a chance to say hello to you, and thank you for your work. The most important thing that we can all do is make sure that we're asking people to get involved and to make sure that they are voting by mail. Our mail is safe, so get everybody out there to vote by mail. I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Dietrich.
Chair Kleeb, thank you so much for leading that important conversation. Governor Inslee, Attorney General Ellison, Executive Director Shepard, on behalf of the Council's leadership team, I'd like to express how very deeply we appreciate and value your perspectives and your participation in this discussion, your leadership and advocacy always, and today the gift of your time and thoughts. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to our next wonderful speaker from my birth state of Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes is the Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin. At age 25, he was elected to the state assembly, where he emerged as a champion on issues of the economy, criminal justice reform, and healthcare. He became the chair of the legislature's Black and Latino caucus in his first term, a national leader on gun violence prevention, and was recognized as one of the top pro-growth progressive leaders in the country. He spent the last year traveling across the country, working with state legislatures and advocacy groups to score progressive victories and beat back regressive attacks based on the terrible ALEC agenda in the Deep South. And then back home to the Midwest. Not surprisingly, as he believes, and I share this, when we lead with a vision, we win. He believes it's time for us to get back on the winning side of things and not just elections, but actually delivering for everyday people. With income inequality in Wisconsin at its highest point since the Great Depression, a poverty rate of 12% statewide, Wisconsin's in urgent need of new leadership, and Mandela Barnes is providing it. We are so excited for his presence here, so grateful for all that he does and that he will do.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction. Truly appreciate the opportunity to address you all, and really can't say enough about the speakers who were before me. So Michelle, really appreciate you having me. Again, I'm Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, so excited to be joining the DNC Council on Environment and Climate Crisis for this important discussion. As we know, the climate crisis has impacted every person in every corner of our country. And we know that it has especially impacted our low-income communities and our Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, whether it's polluted air and water, or lead poisoning, or other environmental hazards, or extreme flooding that's ravaged people's livelihoods. The council is important because if we want to move towards a cleaner future, where we don't have to rely on fossil fuels or other extractive industries to power our lives, Democrats have to lead on tackling this crisis. And if we want that future to be both equitable and sustainable, we know that we have to center environmental justice as we take on this fight. And for the last 4 years, cities and states have had to lead this fight all on their own, because the federal government has turned their backs on our planet, and the federal government has turned their backs on our people. And we have a man in the White House who still thinks climate change is a hoax. And he's tried to do nearly all the progress that we made during the Obama administration, because he cares more about oil companies and polluters than he does the people who actually live in this country. And his denial of the climate is just like his denial of COVID-19. Science has been done away with this administration. Medical advice has been done away with this administration. And here in Wisconsin, after our previous administration dismantled all the climate change efforts, we've been taking our state in an entirely new direction on issues of clean water, energy usage, and other environmental problems. Our administration has been committed since day one to embracing the science and calling out the realities of a changing climate. One of the very first things we did as a state was join the U.S. Climate Alliance, as this nation has to recommit to the tenets of the Paris Climate Accord on January 20th, 2021. We made investments in electrical vehicle infrastructure. We also set our 100% clean energy goal by 2050, but we know that we have to work much harder, much smarter, and much faster, because 2015 is far too far away. And just because that is the goal date doesn't mean we can't get there much further. And we declared the first year in office be the year of clean drinking water. And we pushed forward a very ambitious policy agenda. We also created an office of clean energy and sustainability. And we made investments in green infrastructure here in Wisconsin. And I'm so proud of the work that we're doing at the state level, but there's no question that we need a federal government who's on our side, a federal government who's going to be partners in this work in order to make the kind of impact that we need to address a crisis of this magnitude. That means we need federal leaders, especially in the White House, that are actually willing to push polluters to do the right thing and hold polluters accountable. We need federal leaders whose actions aren't driven by the financial contributions of fossil fuel executives. We need leaders who are not going to drill in our most precious land and resources, like the Arctic, what was just announced earlier this week. And we need leaders who are going to move us towards a radical shift in the way we live, work, and move, so that we become a society that's the center, that centers sustainability in all that we do, from supply chains to transportation systems to farming and agriculture. The leaders we need right now are clear, and that's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Joe and Kamala are going to lead us to this new era. They're going to pave a way for a greener future for our country. They're going to turn the page in the disastrous 3.5 years that we've been through already. It will be 4 years by the time they take office. And now the climate crisis, understanding how complex of an issue this is, it can be overwhelming. But there are some things that we can start doing today that will make a significant change and put us in the right direction. And one of the first steps is stopping the shifting of blame of climate crisis on individuals. As leaders, we can't spend our time telling people to stop using straws or bike more. We have to make big policy decisions, but at the same time, keeping people from using straws and making or asking people to ride bikes more at the same time. We can do both. And we have to stop distracting ourselves with policies and technologies that we have little proof that works when the answers are right in front of us and have been in front of us forever. We know what will work, and we know what will combat the existential crisis that we face. And those big steps are divesting from fossil fuel companies and in the construction of oil pipelines, and doing our best to shut down coal power plants, as they not only wreak havoc on the environment, but they wreak havoc on people's respiratory systems who live in the communities that surround these power plants. And those are the low-income communities, the Black and brown communities that suffer the most. And we know that our reliance on these forms of dirty energy is actively harming communities. And that's one of the biggest problems. Not only is the earth dealing with this crisis and bearing the brunt, actual people, human beings are dealing with this, and their health is being tremendously impacted. And we know that we can't allow these practices to continue, because as long as they continue, that means that we are practicing systemic racism. And this is yet another reason why environmental justice has to drive our climate solutions. And so as I sit on panels and speak at conferences about climate change, I find myself being one of the only people of color. And we have to make sure that changes. And we have to be intentional about being inclusive in this work so that our efforts can be effective, because the people who are impacted should be at the table making the decisions about how to get us out of this. And we also need to listen to Indigenous communities and follow their lead as well, as they have been stewards of this land since before we got here. And it was great to see my good friend Shannon Holsey featured at the beginning of this event, because she's been an amazing partner to this state, both as president of her tribe, Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, and as the president of the Great Lakes Intertribal Council. And we also need to make more room in this movement for our youth. We've seen incredible leadership and organizing from young people all across the country and all across the world on this issue. And our decisions now are going to impact their livelihood, so they too deserve a seat at this table. Because if we truly are serious about creating a country that is equitable and sustainable, we are going to have to center communities of color. And that means those who have traditionally held the power need to start providing space for the people who've been impacted. And when we provide the space, the resources, and decision-making power to communities who have the most at stake, that's when we'll start to build a better world for future generations. So I appreciate you all for having me. I know there's so much work to do. At times, this stuff can get daunting, but honestly, things can get worse. And if we don't start organizing, if we don't give it everything that we can, everything that we have, it will get worse. And we can't afford for that to happen. Future generations can't afford for that to happen. And so we are going to fight for more. We're going to fight for better. We're going to fight for our future. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Government. So grateful for all you do, all you're going to do. One of the things I appreciate, one of the many things I appreciate so much about your work is that you listen to people. And I love that you called out that we need to look for systemic solutions, that we should not be blaming individuals. These are systemic issues that need to be addressed with big, bold policy. And we do have the technologies that work now. We just need to move forward and to do it with expeditiously. Thank you so much for being here. It is now my very great pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Camille Dungy. Camille is the author of the essay collection, Guidebook to Relative Strangers, Journeys into Race, Motherhood, and History. She is an amazing poet. I feel so lucky that we have her here. And a finalist, she's been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She's written 4 collections of poetry, most recently Trophic Cascade. She edited Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry. You should buy it, you should read it. And served as assistant editor on Gathering Ground, which came out from University of Michigan Press in 2006. Camille is the poetry editor for the wonderful Orion magazine, and her work has appeared in Best American Poetry, 100 Best African American Poems, Best American Essays, and more than 30 other anthologies. I have to say, her list of publications, she's one of the all-stars of American poetry Review, the Paris Review. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, American Book Award, NAACP Image Award nominations, and fellowships from the NEA in both prose and poetry, which is a rarefied circle. Dungy is currently University Distinguished Professor in the English Department, Colorado State University, and I am looking forward to hearing her work. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you. What an afternoon. I feel so grateful for being here with all of you today, hearing these charges and this vision and movement. We're all standing together here in a crucial moment. We have a chance over these next 75 days to change the course of history, not just for America, but also for a planet in need of our action, our attention, our care. We're all here working to secure safe, abundant, carbon capturing soil, unthreatened, unpolluted, life-sustaining water, and cleaner, healthier air. There are so many of us. We are different in so many ways, but this is our moment to come together, not to put our differences aside, but to engage the creative potential each of us can offer. We cannot have environmental justice without social justice. We cannot address the economic crisis without addressing the climate crisis. We cannot fully understand our everyday experiences without the valuable insights that literature and the arts provide. And we cannot support the people of the United States, all the different people of the United States, without also supporting the greater than human world. From our differences, we draw strength. Now is our moment to focus all of our minds and hearts and bodies on the planet-saving, life-saving work ahead. I'm Camille Dungy, and I stand here as a writer, a professor, a voter, and I always hope a friend to this planet, our world. It's my honor now to share a poem collected in my book, Trophic Cascade. This poem begins in peril and despair, but it remains committed, as I believe we all must remain committed to the sustaining power of bold, creative, and inclusive action and thought. Characteristics of life. A fifth of animals without backbones could be at risk of extinction, say scientists. Ask me if I speak for the snail, and I will tell you, I speak for the snail. I speak of underneathedness and the welcome of mosses, of life that springs up, little lives that pull back and wait for a moment. I speak for the damselfly, water skeet, mollusk, the caterpillar, the beetle, the spider, the ant. I speak from the time before spinelessness was frowned upon. Ask me if I speak for the moon jelly. I will tell you one thing today and another tomorrow, and I will be as consistent as anything alive on this earth. I move as the currents move, with the breezes. What part of your nature drives you? You in your cubicle ought to understand me. I filter and filter and filter all day. Ask me if I speak for the Nautilus, and I will be silent as the Nautilus shell on a shelf. I can be beautiful and useless, if that's all you know to ask of me. Ask me what I know of longing, and I will speak of distances between meadows of night blooming flowers. I will speak the impossible hope of the firefly. You, with the candle burning and only one chair at your table, must understand such wordless desire. To say it is mindless is missing the point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camille. You moved me to tears. So beautiful. I want to thank everyone. There's so much at stake, so much. Our Earth, this election is so important. Let's all get out there and win it. Thank you to Jane Kleeb for helping with moderation. Thank you to all the speakers, to the DNC for giving us this time and space. Many thanks to our convention, our production staff who did seamless, amazing work. And I would like to end with a reference to one other poet, the great feminist poet Adrienne Rich, who is a hero of mine, who thought deeply about social and economic challenges. And we do need the poets and the arts right now. One of her poems has the title, "What Kinds of Times Are These?" A question is posed by that title that we're all asking ourselves right now. What kinds of times are these? And this is how the poem in part answers the question. Don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else, but here. Our country moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. As that poem says, written long ago, presciently, there's more than one way to disappear. We can disappear due to violence or incarceration, extinction, deportation. We can also disappear because of dread. Dread of the climate future we are afraid is coming. Dread of illness, oppression, discrimination, job loss, racism, violence, police. We can disappear, but we cannot be afraid to speak up. We must not get used to the new normal. Not the new normal of climate change or extreme weather or the rise of authoritarianism, the breakdown of effective governance. We know there's a better way forward, and that path lies through victory in November. Victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, victory in the Senate with Paulette Jordan and others, victory up and down ballot. And all the while, because as my friend Peggy Shepard, who spoke earlier, says, we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. We are working to rebuild a future that is green, that is inclusive, and that is just. Please work with us, work to elect Joe Biden and other Democrats. Please join us at dncclimate.org. Thank you so much to everyone, and good night.